Welcome to the Connor's Corner segment of Ask the Lawyer. You know, some of us remember back to September 11th, and obviously it was a tough situation. One of the people that we had on the front lines right now was Commissioner Bernard Kerik, and we're very happy to have him with us on a show today. How you doing today, Commissioner?
I'm good, Mike. Thank you.
Okay, so what was it like on September 11th for you that day?
Uh, well, I mean, the day started out just like every other day. In fact, it was sort of a special day in New York City. That day was the primary, if you recall. Um, uh, Bloomberg was running. We were looking forward to the primary. I got to my office early. I worked out, exercised in the back of my office, and I was in the process of taking a shower. Um, when my staff came in and told me that a plane had just hit Tower 1, and like everyone else, I guess I thought it was a small airliner, one of these things that fly up and down the Hudson River, until I actually saw the building. I went into my conference room and saw the building out the conference room window, and it's about a half a mile, I guess, from the towers where the tower stood, and I realized that the damage was sort of catastrophic. Um, and I spoke to the mayor immediately after. I told him I was going to meet him at the operations center. Um, if you recall, our emergency command center for the city was directly across the street from Tower 1. It was in Tower 7. And I drove down there to meet the mayor. But when we got to Vesey Street, they had it blocked off, and we couldn't get onto Vesey Street because people were jumping from the top of 1, and they were landing on Vesey, right, south of Vesey, right in the courtyard between 1 and 2, Tower 1 and 2. And I backed up the vehicles, stood by waiting for the mayor, and I was actually standing in the middle of the street, right around the corner of Barclay Street and West Broadway, when the second airliner slammed through Tower 2 above me. And it was at that point that I knew we were under attack.
And how did you react to it? I mean, how do you? It's something you can't really anticipate whatsoever.
No, I mean, look, the damage to Tower 1 in itself was an enormous amount of damage. It was something that, was going to be problematic for us in many ways. But the one thing that it was to our benefit, ever since Giuliani had taken office in 1994, he created the Office of Emergency Management. We continually had these mock drills and tabletop exercises, and we planned for just about every kind of crisis you could imagine. We never planned for this, of course, but we were pretty well prepared. When that second plane hit Tower 2 and we realized that we were under attack, then it was a different ballgame for us. One, we had to respond to the devastation and start a rescue process. But we also there were other things that I was concerned with at the time, and that was, how many more planes are there? Are there any more planes? Do they have attacks planned on the ground? Is there anybody on the ground that they're going to, are they going to go into the mass transit system? There's a number of different things that I was, that was sort of running through my head at the time. But we just had to take it one step at a time. And I activated what we called at the time an Operation Omega, which is basically the entire city shuts down. If you recall, there were these big signs, New York City closed. I think that's the first time it had ever happened, where we closed New York City completely to the outside world, with the exception of emergency vehicles. And then the response began. And, it was a coordinated effort between the NYPD, the fire department, Port Authority police. And at the end of the day, the death toll was staggering. With, I lost 23 people that worked for me. Fire department lost 343, and the Port Authority lost 37. But I have to tell you, those numbers are the numbers from that day and that day alone. Just yesterday, 2 days ago, There was somebody from the emergency service unit in the Department of Correction, a guy by the name of Larry Alder. He died 2 days ago from cancer. We've had a number, tens of people that have died as a result of, what happened down there. And a lot of times I think people forget that.
A lot of people do forget, but I think a lot of people do remember. Now, after 9/11, you went to work for the Bush administration in Iraq. Exactly what did you do there?
I guess it was in April of '03 or early May of '03. I was contacted by the White House and the Pentagon to basically go to Iraq to take over as the interim minister of Interior to reconstitute the interior. If you recall, when we went into Baghdad I think we took Baghdad on April 19th, basically the entire government collapsed. It imploded. And with that implosion, a lot of the national security forces, the police force, the interior, they, disbanded back into the communities and took off, fearful of their jobs, fearful of their lives, not knowing what was happening. I went in, I think, 2 or 3 weeks after the fall of Baghdad as the interim minister of Interior to begin reconstituting the interior. In other words, bringing back the police service, retraining, or really training the police service, recruiting the new police service, getting the airports up and running, the immigrations, customs, things like that. That all fell under the interior. And I stayed there in Baghdad for, for about 4 months until we actually appointed an Iraqi, the post-Saddam Hussein Iraqi Minister of Interior. I think he came in early September of '03, and when he did, then I left.
Then you were nominated for Director of Homeland Security, and some bad things started to happen. So, and you wrote a book about it, From Jailer to Jailed, My Journey from Correction and Police Commissioner to Inmate. So tell the audience, what was happening, what did happen?
Well, in December of 2004, right after, even earlier, it was November 2004, after President Bush won the election, I was contacted by the White House, and a vetting process started concerning a possible nomination for Homeland Security to take over Tom Ridge's job. And one thing led to another, and it's an enormous process. I mean, people, when you watch this from afar, or you see it on television, or people watch it in the news, they have no conception of what's going on with regard to these presidential cabinet nominations. But the amount of work and the amount of stuff that goes into them from the nominee's perspective is just beyond. It's pretty much beyond anything that we know. You have to go back every year of your taxes, every public speech you've ever given, anything and everything you've ever done or said or done publicly or whatever. I mean, they go through, they scrutinize your entire life. And during that process, I went through that process for several weeks. And on December 3rd of 2004, I was nominated by President Bush as the Secretary of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, basically to take over security for the country. And it was, without a doubt, one of the greatest honors in my lifetime, naturally. I was a kid that was born in Newark, New Jersey, raised in Patterson. I had been abandoned by my mother at 3 years old. She was murdered when I was 9. I dropped out of high school in the 11th grade. I was not the typical candidate that would be standing in the White House before the president being nominated for one of the top positions in American government. So it was a great honor for me. And that was on a Friday. It was on a Friday morning at 10 o'clock. And 1 week from the day I was nominated, I sent the president a letter basically withdrawing my nomination, my name from consideration, as a result of having to admit that I had a nanny, a domestic servant that my wife and I had employed for close to 2 years that we didn't pay tax on. And, that started I don't know what you want to call it. It started a feeding frenzy within the press. And over the next 18 months to 2 years, I went through, well, really, it's even more than that. That was in '04. I think I was finally indicted in November of '07 in a 16-count federal indictment, which included not paying taxes on my kid's nanny and a multitude of other things that they had dug up during my investigation. And so I went through this, both a state investigation and a federal investigation. The state investigation was an ethics investigation regarding some apartment renovations I had on my apartment in Riverdale that I had paid for. The government said I didn't pay enough, and that was resolved. The Bronx DA concluded it was an ethics violation. I was fined. They concluded there was no criminal conduct, and they concluded that there was no quid pro quo between me and the contractor. But the federal government came in, and they ignored their findings, and they went on, put together a grand jury investigation, and I was basically charged with the same thing, under federal law, plus a bunch of tax stuff that came up during their investigation.
You spent your whole life in law enforcement, corrections, police department. Now all of a sudden you're a defendant, and you have a different perspective on the justice system.
Yeah. You know what, Mike? You being an attorney, you'll understand this a lot better than the general public. Maybe not your legal guys that follow your show, but for the general public, they don't have a conception of what goes on within the criminal justice system, nor do, in many cases, in most cases, I'd say even the legislators that write the laws that we live by, they don't have a clue either. And the reason I know that is because I ran two of the largest law enforcement organizations in this country. I ran the NYPD, and I ran Rikers for nearly 6 years, and I had unparalleled success in reforming Rikers, in taking it from one of the worst, most violent jail systems in the nation and turning it into an international model for efficiency, accountability, and safety. So I thought I knew the criminal justice system, but I knew nothing compared to the realities I was faced with and the things I learned as a result of my investigation, as a result of my plea, my guilty plea, my imprisonment, my incarceration. And it's given me a perspective that basically no one else has, because I ran these systems, and then I got to see the system from the inside, living as an inmate, but with the experience of a very accomplished police and law enforcement executive and administrator. So it's been a life-altering experience, naturally. And, I would never say that it was worth it. But if I had to learn anything through this process, I'm glad I learned what I learned, because I now want to make sure that the American people know what happens. The American people knows that it could happen to them. And more than anything else, I now want to take this, education that I've been given to members of Congress, make them understand where the changes must be made within the criminal justice system, and try to get that done.
Well, sometimes when I hear different things, the power of the federal government is overwhelming when you're the defendant.
You know what? And now, as harsh as that may sound to your listeners, I can assure them that that's an understatement. That's an understatement. And I want you to think about this for a second. Give me, and I challenge any of your listeners to do this, tell me one job, one profession, one government agency, one company, any company, any government agency in our country. Give me one profession that has a perfect record. There are none. And I don't care what you come up with. Maybe on a company scale, Apple is one of the most successful companies, but it doesn't have a perfect record by no means. The bigger companies, Home Depot, the government agencies, pick any government agency, nobody has a perfect record except for one. There's one organization that has nearly a perfect record, and that is the United States Department of Justice, United States Attorney's Office. A 97 to a 99% conviction rate. How's that possible? How is that possible? Think about this. 97% of the indictments in the United States Department of Justice result in pleas. How could that be? When you have state governments, state agencies, their average rate is 65 to 75%. The United States Attorney's Office has a 97% conviction rate based on plea bargains, people pleading out. And then out of the 3% that's left, 98 to 90% of them, 98 to 99% of those are convictions. Perfect record. I think it's impossible. And I think it's impossible based not only on the numbers. Logic would tell you there's a problem. And I think people are beginning to understand that. But after you've been through it, I can assure you there are issues, and the general public and Congress, they just don't get it. They don't understand it.
What can Congress, what can the general public do? I mean, there is a problem. I mean, there's no question about it. There are a lot of innocent people who are taking pleas.
Well, I think first and foremost, anytime you have an organization that has no accountability or very little to no accountability, that's problematic. If you look at a number of different studies in this country on prosecutorial misconduct in at the federal level, less than 2% of the cases that are investigated, less than 2% result in some sort of disciplinary action. And I think that's a problem. You had the Ted Stevens case where there was confirmed findings of prosecutorial misconduct, evidence that was concealed, and statements that were wrong, and all this other stuff. Those prosecutors were suspended, and I understand they were just brought back to work. They were sent back to the Justice Department to go back to work. I have a problem with that. And I think every American in this country should have a problem with it, because forget what happened to me. It can happen to anyone. And I think that's what people don't understand. When you are the target of a criminal investigation in this country, it is a fight for your life. A felony conviction is a life sentence. And I think people don't realize that. you have to look at an organization like the Department of Justice. And don't get me wrong, there are fabulous, fantastic, phenomenal prosecutors in this country that work for the government that do sort of, so to speak, God's work, and they do a great job at doing what they're doing. But when you have a system that allows people to violate the law to enforce it, and you have prosecutors that are more concerned about convictions than they are evidence and treating people fairly and objectively, then there's a problem. And that stuff should be handled. And when there's no accountability, that's a problem.
Listen, I admire you for coming out. We're running out of time, but I admire you for coming out because I think a lot of your people in your position would just lay back and stay low, and you've got the courage to speak out. The name of the book, From Jailer to Jailed, My Journey from Correction and Police Commissioner to Inmate. Thank you, Commissioner Kerik, for being on the show, and if you have something else, please let us know.